Welcome back. Burundi has been embroiled in a political unrest since May, when elections took place granting President Pierre Nkurunziza a third term in office. While the UN says it wants to prevent another genocide in the landlocked country, the African Union says it has plans to deploy 5,000 peacekeepers there. Fighting got worse in the past 2 weeks, leaving nearly 90 people dead, though aid agencies fear the figure could be much higher. International intervention, it seems, could have come a bit sooner.
Burundi is yet to know peace from the politics that promises a lot, but delivers very little. Burundi's dead can make witness to the atrocities that have occurred in the country since President Pierre Nkurunziza resumed a third term in office. Unresolved political tensions have arisen and snowballed into a real crisis in the country. Residents of the capital, Bujumbura, were however witnesses to the recent violence that claimed nearly 90 lives. Unknown gunmen are reported to have attacked 3 military sites and clashed with security forces. Blasts and gunfire rented the air as people remained indoors, lying on the ground and praying it will soon be over. The aftermath saw streets littered with bullet-ridden bodies, with no one to claim the dead. The army said some of the dead were the result of house-to-house searches for the gunmen. The United Nations has waded in, blaming Burundi's leaders of dragging the country towards a full-blown civil war. Speaking at a special session of the Human Rights Council, UN Human Rights Commissioner Zeid Ra'ad Al-Hussein condemned a campaign of political repression that included beatings, arrests and house-to-house searches, which he said at least 400 people had been killed and nearly 3,500 detained.
The time for piecemeal responses and fiddling around the edges is over. The situation in Burundi demands a robust, decisive response from the international community. I called last month on the Security Council to consider all possible steps to stop the ongoing violence and prevent a regional conflict, including travel bans and asset freezes. Today, those calls are more relevant than ever.
Western countries such as the United States have been concerned by the crisis. Last week, it put out a statement warning citizens to avoid travel to Burundi and for those within the country to leave. It also puts blame of the crisis squarely on the shoulders of President Pierre Nkurunziza.
The United States is deeply alarmed by the spiraling violence in Burundi perpetrated or directed by government and non-government actors alike. President Nkurunziza's pursuit of a third term in office has led to a humanitarian, economic, and security crisis, which in turn has resulted in more than 200,000 Burundians fleeing for neighboring countries. The United States strongly believes that the international community must use all the tools available to push for an immediate end of the cycle of violence perpetrated by both the security forces and elements of the armed opposition.
Meanwhile, more than 220,000 people have fled Burundi since the crisis erupted in April. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees and its partners have opened new camps and have started moving tens of thousands of Burundian refugees to Karago, Unduta and Tembele camps, 100 kilometers from Tanzania's Yarugusu camp, which is greatly overcrowded. The Burundian civil war pitted rebel groups of the Hutu majority, including one led by Nkurunziza, against what was then an army led by the Tutsi minority. The Burundian civil war pitted rebel groups of the Hutu majority, including one led by Nkurunziza, against what was then an army led by the Tutsi minority.
Now, the situation in Burundi does call for great concern because what happens there could spill into other countries in the Great Lakes region of East Africa. Soon, aid agencies will be overwhelmed by the number of refugees they have to attend to with not enough resources. Let's head on now to my conversation with Dr. Rashid Akinyemi of the Department of Political Science at the University of Lagos concerning the Burundi crisis. Dr. Akinyemi, thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of the situation in Burundi, the crisis that has developed in the past 2 weeks?
The only problem with Burundi is that we had a background to the case in Burundi. Why everybody is scared is because of the history that happened in the 90s, and then the case of Rwanda genocide. So I think that's why everybody is scared. But if not, I think it's just a business as usual. Because if I take a take on democracy in Africa, I think we don't have democracy. The whole of Africa, what we are practicing is democracy with hyphens. Like, well, you have pseudo democracy, you have electoral democracy, and all those things. So I think we are just playing around with it, and the West is just taking us as so, because they know actually that, well, I mean, what we are doing is not what they are doing over there when we talk about democracy. So the issue of elections and producing a government and a president or prime minister, and then having one, two, and then looking for third terms, it's just the same trend we had even before the end of the 1980s, when we had the so-called democratization process. No African government, no African president, no African leader really wants to rule and then leave that place. And it is because the understanding of democracy with African leaders is different from what we say in the academics, or even the Western world is understands under democracy. So I think the Burundi case is just scaring as a result of the fear of another genocide on this continent, which we can't actually afford. Yesterday, look at what happened in Rwanda. The guy got a third term. So nobody knows how the people must have been intimidated for that. Because, well, one of the people will be told that, well, you know, you don't want that to happen to you again, so you better... so that's the trend in Africa. In other places, every African leader would like to go for third term, fourth term.
But democracy does have only one definition, you know, but you're supposed to take democracy and you're supposed to domesticate it to fit your own political views.
Yes, that's true. But again, yeah, then if that is the case, then let us call a spade a spade. Let us call it African democracy. Okay? Then we will understand that this is a different thing. Then, well, theoretically, you have what you call democracy, but then also in the Western world, you have different trends and types of democracy. But again, there are rules and regulations that have been followed. You can't change the rule at the end of the game. So what's happening in Africa is actually, as I said, I would not compare to democracy as expected somewhere else. Well, if you say, yeah, I agree with you, you say, well, we could culturalize it, put it within the content, say, political culture and democracy, they must go in line, but let's call it spade a spade. If you want a Yoruba democracy, let's call it Yoruba democracy. So you won't be able to measure it with any democracy elsewhere. So nobody will be now violating any law. Now the Western world is telling Burundi, don't do that, because they believe that the understanding of democracy here and over there is the same thing. So if the moment we tell the West that, look, this is the way we want to go, we could call it anything else. We could call it palaver politics, okay? But this is our rule. And then once you have a rule of your own, then you should also abide by it. So we should stop actually being hypocritical. The West is also hypocritical. They know that actually what we are doing is not the same democracy as they understood, okay? The only thing that they think works is universal is the election. And that's why we call this one electoral democracy. After that, anything stops. So since the end of the so-called democratization, since the end of the 1990s, democratization has stopped in Africa. It has been blocked. So whatever is coming on is just being built on the processes that took place at the end of the Cold War, end of 1990, no, end of 89, 1990, and others. But since then, democratization has stopped. Human rights violation is high. Look at elections, riggings, and other things. So I am not convinced that we are talking about the same product if we talk about democracy in Africa. So let's tell the world that this is what we mean.
Still ahead is the concluding part of our conversation and the democratic presidential debate. Please join us again.